Recently, ARC's Director of Comprehensive Planning, Tom Wyatt, had a chance to discuss America's rapidly changing demographics with Martha Farnsworth Riche, former director of the U.S. Census Bureau and founding editor of American Demographics magazine. Let's take a look.
Dr. Riche, we really appreciate you being in Atlanta with us to participate in our Atlanta 50 Forward process and to talk about the issues of demographic change and diversity in the Atlanta region. So thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Our forecast suggests that the Atlanta region is going to undergo some really significant changes in its pattern of its population over the next 50 years. Your research has talked about the difference between pyramids and pillars. Could you tell us something about what that means and what that might imply for our community?
Well, simply put, it means that people don't die young anymore. And the old population pillar was of a population that consisted mostly of babies and young people. Lots of them died off before they got to adulthood. More died in middle age and adulthood, and not very many survived to become old. Now, with all the revolution in healthcare we had throughout the 20th century, most people live to old age.
What does that imply then about what we might see happen in the Atlanta region over the next several decades? Changes in the workplace, changes in living environments, changes in demands on our healthcare, even how we're going to interact with each other.
Well, in a way, it means that you're well positioned to deal with demographic and other related kinds of change. For instance, yes, with an older population, you have more health needs. That means you need a workforce. You need people that are going to supply those health needs. So you've, in theory, got the labor force that can staff the nursing homes, staff the hospitals, and give the health care. Similarly, places that are having lots and lots of young people have to grow their educational system. They've got to import teachers. You probably don't have to do that. So you probably have people on both the supply and demand side of just about every need that you might have.
Well, now, another element of diversity is not just the changing age structure, but also the changing profile of our ethnicity. We see significant numbers of immigrants and growth in other populations. Is that something that is going to continue, and what might we see this region being in 50 years?
Both your populations are growing, white and black, but your real growth is coming in Asians and particularly in Hispanics. So that's really kind of taking your whole black-white perspective and broadened it considerably. That, interestingly, interacts with that age diversity we were talking about, because your new diversity is younger, and your older diversity is definitely older. Your older lack of diversity. And so those two things are going to interact in terms of community engagement and community development to either cause you troubles or bring you benefits, depending on how you deal with it.
You make an interesting, or have an interesting perspective in terms of making the business case for diversity, embracing diversity. The problem being that unmanaged diversity may lead to problems, whereas if you manage diversity, it can actually be a benefit to the community, not only from an economic perspective, but presumably also a social perspective as well. Could you talk about that?
Well, a lot of organizations are looking at the business case for diversity because we've moved from the civil rights movement, which began in the South, and so much of it took place right here in Atlanta, the civil rights movement that put racial and ethnic differences on the agenda in ways that have turned out to be very productive. Businesses, large corporations in particular, are looking at this business case because they're looking at audiences of customers that are more diverse. And they're saying to themselves, what do we need to do to change so we can be successful with these more diverse customers? And they're looking at, well, what has a payoff for us in terms of our resources and investing versus what's just a nice thing to do? And they are looking at when it makes a difference to have, say, sales teams look like the people they're going out and selling to. That's an obvious thing that people think of first off. But the most important benefit turns out to be much more subtle, and it's about enhancing creativity and enhancing innovation, which are really the two keys across our country for being successful in a more diverse world. It turns out that when diverse groups work together, and that's just not race and ethnic diversity, it could be something like having a work team where you've got marketers and accountants and lawyers on the same team. They don't think the same way, they don't see the same priorities, but if they can make each other understand what they're talking about, you get better ideas, you get better implementation of them, and you get, frankly, better performance.
Mm-hmm. Since these phenomena are really new, certainly new for Atlanta and maybe even new for the United States, are there examples of other cities in this country or maybe elsewhere that have come to grips with issues of rapidly changing nature of their population and embracing and taking advantage of the opportunity presented by diversity?
Well, I guess if looking at this country, the first place I'd go to have some good talks would be California. They've been looking at these issues for probably a couple decades longer than you have. They were the first state to become majority-minority, and you'll find some success stories out there, and you'll find some failure stories out there, things you want to avoid. You're probably relatively rare amongst regions, metropolitan regions, that are taking this kind of look, not because you're different in your demographics so much, it's because you are used to looking forward in Atlanta. I mean, I well remember all the work you did, the creative work, to get the Olympics here in 1996. Huge success. The rest of the country was astonished that you pulled it off. So I think you're more outward looking than probably other places. You can go a lot of places and you will find things you can adapt, but you'll think of a lot of things for yourselves.
Well, good. I think on that hopeful note, we'll close this discussion. And again, we very much appreciate you participating in our Atlanta 50 Forward process and sharing some very provocative and I hope very helpful ideas with us. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tom.